All right, hey, we're going to be in John chapter 12. You got a Bible, you can turn there. I'm going to read it for you, so if you don't, no big deal. But this is the beginning, like I said, of Passion Week. And so we've been kind of wandering in Luke. We're looking at what we call encounters with Jesus, right? So what we've been doing is looking at those, not where he taught, and did the big miracle thing, but more of the one-on-one encounters, like his communication face to face. We did look last week at a large crowd, but that was because there were four friends and a paralytic that decided to break open the roof of the house in which Jesus was teaching and drop him down. And there was a conversation that we wanted to have. So we're fast forwarding to today, and we're going to go to the end of these encounters. And I'm going to catch you up to speed, but we're going to go back and kind of journey through the scriptures like that. But so we've been looking in Luke. We're in John today. John writes about this. Now, if you remember, he was one of the fishermen that when that whole catch of fish happened, and he tells Peter, James, John, Andrew, hey, from now on you're going to be fishers of men. That was their official call. So early on, then John, being a brother of James, sons of thunder is what they were. They were kind of political rebels, if you will. They were seeking to overthrow Rome. They were just the extremists in that sense. And so they were called the sons of thunder. They were known to be rabble rousers, so to speak, until God got a hold of them. Then they became holy rabble rousers, and that's the way it should be. And so this is John's writing of this. It's interesting, and the phrase always strikes me at the end of the book of John, where he says this. He says, I suppose if everything were to be written down that Jesus did or said, the whole world couldn't contain the library written in. And I think 3.5 public years, and he's like, man, if I told you everything he did, we'd need a whole library around the world just to fill it with what he did. And so it just strikes me that man, as we have the privilege of reading some of these things. So at this point in the ministry, I'm going to catch you up to speed, but at this point in the ministry, Jesus is now the crowd favorite. If ever he was at the zenith of his ministry, it's right now, because just before we turn to where we are in chapter 12, we find that that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Now you start off with turning water into wine, and then you do some demoniac. You heal some lepers. You heal paralytics. You heal a woman who had a hemorrhaging issue, and she touched him in his garment. You hear about him forgiving sins of a woman that was caught in the act of adultery. You see all of those things, and then on top of all of that, he raises the dead. He's like the rock star at this point, and everybody is believing him to be the Messiah. And so at present, see, unless you know the history, the Jewish people were in desperate bondage to Rome, and they knew that they just still carry this chip on their shoulder, like we don't belong here. We belong with an empire. The kingdom of Israel, right, is what we're looking for. And so they've been longing for it. And all of the teachers of the law and all of the down through the ages, the prophets, everything that you can read in what they had, the Old Testament, just like we do, everything they read said that there would be a Messiah that would come. And so for the first time in a lot of years, they believed that this could be the one. And so Jesus is now, so after he raised Lazarus from the dead, the Jewish leaders decided they were going to kill him. The Pharisees, they hated him. They hated everything about him because he was upsetting their apple cart, so to speak. And so it was at that moment they said, we're going to kill Lazarus and we're going to kill him too. So Jesus hid out. He no longer walked publicly at a time now. So he's in Ephraim, kind of a little town. But now that it's Passover, he and about 120 others and the disciples and so forth have been journeying together to come back up to Jerusalem. Now, it's like what happens when you go to some big event. You can't get a hotel right there where the event is. You have to do it kind of outside. Jesus stayed in Bethany, which is about a 2-mile hike over the hill. And that is the home of Lazarus. So they're being reunited because there was a season after the resurrection of Lazarus that he had to hide out, right? And so he still did ministry, but he stayed away from the Jews because of what was going on. So he was working more in the Gentile region and some of those things. And so this is where we find ourselves. But now it's Passover festival. And so Jesus comes into Bethany. He's got a crowd. He's probably staying there. That was kind of where he stayed. He had that home away from home. Maybe you have places like that when you travel. If you go somewhere, you're going to stay in that home because you got friends there, right? And so that's kind of how this works here. And so they're, I mean, he's already had the 120 following. It's a pretty big crowd, so they're having a party. This is where Mary comes in, and she's just delighted to see Jesus again, thinking of how he's raised her brother from the dead. And so she's just enamored with him. And so she goes and gets her most expensive vial of perfume. It's rare. It came from India. And she just broke that thing open and just began to wipe Jesus' feet and clean it with that perfume. And you know that story. She's just giving Jesus her best. She doesn't care anymore. At this point, she's all in. Much like David was when he danced in the streets, and just excited about what God has done. And that's the place that all of us really strive to get to, or we should, where we're just all in. And so this is where she was, and she was just giving her best. Now, Judas gets upset about that. Remember, he's the one that's going to betray Jesus. And the thing's already been kind of set in motion. But Judas was upset that she took all that instead of giving the money to the treasury, which Judas happened to be over. And Judas was an embezzler, thief, scumbag. And so he was fussing at her, like, why did you do that? You just wasted all that stuff. It could have been given to the poor. And I love how John just doesn't even play games with it. He just says, look, the only reason why he did that was because he's a thief. That's what John calls it. So it's not like John doesn't know these things. And so that's what's going on. And then there's a large crowd that there as well. And they're kind of the rubberneckers. They're just hoping to see another miracle. That's what's going on. So we can read all of that in this first section. I'll read it for you so we get the flavor. Therefore, 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made him a dinner there. Martha was serving, and Lazarus was reclining at one of the tables. Mary then took a pound of expensive perfume of pure nard and anointed Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, the one who intended to betray him, said, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and the proceeds given to the poor? This is where John says, now he said this, not because he cared about the poor, but because he's a thief. And he kept the money box, and he used to steal from what was put into it. Therefore, Jesus says, leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me. The large crowd of the Jews then learned that he was there, and they came, not on account of Jesus only, but so they might also see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. But the chief priest planned to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and believing in Jesus. So that's kind of the setup for where we're going now. And so this is what we would call the triumphal entry. And there's a lot about this that I think is important for us to understand. So it says verse 12 of John chapter 12, on the next day, when the large crowd had come to the feast, heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, they took the branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and began shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, indeed the King of Israel. So this is a big deal, and I think it's important that we just slow down long enough to kind of see this. So they got the palm branches out. Now, in those days, we don't really have anything similar to that that we do, but the palm branches always signified like victory and freedom. They'd grab those things. Maybe if you, I hate to associate the American flag with that, but maybe if you're one of those patriots and you stick your flag up for freedom and all that. But the palm branches was a great reminder that they are the victorious ones and that they have freedom because of the King of Kings who will soon come, which they think now that he's it. So Jesus rides in, not on a war horse, but on a donkey, right? And this is what makes it kind of powerful that happens here. So they're out there and they're singing Hosanna. Now we're going to look at that in a minute, but they're singing Hosanna. And then he says this, Jesus, finding a young donkey, sat on it. As it is written, do not fear, daughter of Zion. Behold, your king is coming, seated on a donkey colt. Now, that phrase is interesting because it comes from Zechariah, the prophet, who wrote that 500 years, actually 500, about 30 years before Jesus shows up here. So here's somebody writing about something that's going to happen 530 years down the road, and it happens. That's why Jesus rode in on the donkey. That's why he did what he did. So God's way is, I think we know this by now, though. God's way is rarely flashy. Don't confuse noise with power. There's a lot of people out there that love make a lot of noise for Jesus, and it's not always the noise that's full of that. God's moved by the quiet obedience and humility of his people. That's what moves him. That's what he's called us to be, people of humility. And so, listen, I think the other thing, too, is that they were expecting the king. I think they were expecting the war horse. I really do. I think that they were expecting him to come in, and so here I am, and then Messiah was going to be here. Now, they know a lot more than probably we do about this, and I'm going to remind us of some of the things that we see here. But part of me just is mindful of the fact that Jesus doesn't always come the way you want him to. Sometimes he comes the way you need him to, right? And I think it's important that we see that. You know, there are times we think God's going to do this, he's going to do that, and he doesn't. But he does exactly what we need. And so we should just be mindful of that. So we get to verse 13, and it says, and now we'll kind of review this and come back to it. They took the branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him, began shouting, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now, that phrase is found in Psalm 118. Now, I'm trying to make sure this doesn't sound like I'm doing a lecture thing, but it's important to understand some timetables of what's going on here. Psalm 118 was written by David back about 1,000 years. Now we're 1,000 years before Jesus showed up, and this is what it says. It says, let me get to it in verse 20. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let's rejoice and be glad in it. Right now, listen to that phrase. Because we always say that, right? We'll say that like today. This is the day the Lord has made. We'll rejoice and be glad in it. And it is true. We should. But this phrase is that day. This is a specific day that they're thinking of. I want you to hear this because I want you to see the breadth and vastness of who God is. 1,000 years before Jesus came, he had David write a song about the day of this triumphal entry. This is what I want you to hear. This is what that is. I'm going to show you. It's going to take me a little bit of mathematical stuff and jump here and there, but I want you to hear this, and then because it's just mind-blowing to me. He says, this is the day. Salvation would appear, Messiah would arrive, and he says this in the beginning of this passage. Open the gates of righteousness to me. That is a reference to exactly what Jesus is going to do. Does he not open the gates of righteousness so that you and I can have his righteousness? The only way we get that is through his death and resurrection. And so because we then die with him and raised again, we have his righteousness. That's how we get it. And so he's saying here in this very phrase that would happen, that the gates of righteousness. So David's saying, open the gates of righteousness to me. And he's going to say later on, a stone which the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. David wrote this 1,000 years before anyone, Jesus himself, referred to himself as the cornerstone. And so it's because God doesn't see like you and me see. God sees, and this is my kid view of it. If you ever go to the Grand Canyon or someplace where you can see the whole thing, and there's the great Colorado River flowing through it. If you're standing there, you can see people get in the rafts at the front end when they load up, and you can watch them go through the rapids, and you can see them come out the back end. It's like you're seeing all of that at one time. I'm telling you, that's how God sees all of eternity, and you specifically. He knows when you came into the stream, and he knows when you're going to leave the stream. And so this is how he sees things. He doesn't see things like we see it. He's bigger than time. And so this passage is reminding us of those things. Now, he says, this came about from the Lord. It's marvelous in our eyes. This is the day which the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Please, O Lord, do save us. That's the phrase Hosanna right there. Please, Lord, do send prosperity. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. We have blessed you from the house of the Lord. Now, that's a phrase. I want to get to the whole date thing for you so that you'll understand something. All right, hang with me now. In Daniel, chapter 9, Daniel's praying. Are you tracking with me? I haven't lost you yet, have you? All right. Daniel's praying in chapter 9 because he wants to know when this end time thing's going to happen. And so he's been praying. He's prayed. I mean, he's like laid out on the ground. He's prayed for days. When he gets up, the angel Gabriel stands before him and said, the minute you uttered your prayer, God sent me to give you this answer. And so he gives the answer about this. And he says this. He says, so that you are to know and understand that from the issuing of a decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with streets and moat, even in times of distress. So there's a signal. He says, you want to know when the Prince is going to come? You want to know when the Messiah is going to have that triumphal entry? He says, from the decree to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. Now, I'm going to do the math for you, just so you get that. All right. So if we track that, and then we go to Nehemiah chapter 2, he tells us when that was. He tells us that it was, and it came about in the month of Nisan that the decree to rebuild the wall was. Remember, the walls were torn down. Nehemiah decided, hey, I want to go rebuild Jerusalem. The king lets him. He gets a free pass. He even gets coupons, so to speak, to gather trees in order to get there and to do the thing that he's going to do. And so that decree happened on the month of Nisan. Now, for those of you who don't know about all this, that's March the 5th, and the year was 444 BC. All right, now just breathe. I'm going to give you some math. We're going to be done with this, okay? But this is powerful. He said, so this psalm that David wrote is talking about a very specific day. The way we track that day is by looking at what we've just seen. And so when Daniel said that it would be 7 and then 69, that adds up to 173,880 days. You don't need to know anything other than just a bunch of numbers. A lot of days. Add that to March 5th when Nehemiah said, today we're going to rebuild the wall, and you get to March 30th, 33 AD, which is exactly the day that he's entering into the triumphal entry. And so when that psalm says this is the day, it's a specific prophecy that said 173,880 days from when the wall is decreed to be built until the Lord comes is going to be that many days. And the day of this triumphal entry, Passover week, began March the 30th, 33 AD. The crowd knew that. They were singing the right. They didn't just go, hey, well, let's just find a psalm and sing it to him. Hey, this might be a good one. No, they knew, they assumed he was the king. This is what they all assumed. Don't miss this. All the crowd saw the miracles and go, this has to be the Messiah. Who has done the things that he has done? And so the crowd knew him and they loved him that day. And in 7 days, they're going to stand with everybody else and say, nope, crucify him. Right? Listen, you can't just follow Jesus when his plan fits your plan. Right? I think that's how we normally like to do it. I had a buddy of mine who used to tell me all the time, hey, I'm with you when you're right. Right? I mean, like, well, that doesn't help because if I'm ever wrong, you mean you don't have my back? But it's kind of like, hey, we're all for God when he's doing exactly what we want. But he doesn't always do exactly what we want. Let's let God be king, right? When it makes sense and when it doesn't. This is what we're called to do. God always keeps his promises, and that's what he did there. He didn't come to sit on a throne in Jerusalem. He came to rule and reign over your heart and my heart. Do we know this? I mean, we know this. This is what he says. So let's finish this out, and then we'll be done here. But it says this back in John chapter 12. These things his disciples did not understand at first. But when Jesus was glorified, so they hear all this stuff, and his disciples are like, what do they mean? Behold your king seated on a donkey. They didn't get it. Now the crowd got it, but these disciples, they were unsure. These things his disciples did not understand at first, but when Jesus was glorified, that is when he was killed and resurrected, it says, then they remembered these things were written down of him, and they had done these things through him. So the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify about him. That's why they did. After that, the 120 that were in the upper room, the same ones that were here, and all the disciples, man, they just kept spreading the gospel because of that. Then it says this. So the Pharisees said to one another, you see that you are not accomplishing anything. Look, the whole world has gone after him. And now they've decided to kill him. And so this is the message of Palm Sunday. And so this is how it starts. The whole world going, yay, Jesus. And then it's going to slowly get worse and worse and worse until they choose a convict to free, Barabbas, over Jesus, and rather see him crucified. And we're going to look at that story next week. But I just wanted to kind of let us set the table for this and look at these encounters that Jesus has. Powerful truth. Let's, man, I got another good song. We sing this one a lot, but I like it.